When my daughter Brinley told me they needed space this Christmas at the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 12 years, I just smiled and said, "Of course, sweetheart." What she didn't know was that I'd already made a phone call that morning. By Christmas Eve, there was a giant red bow on the front door and a news crew filming as I handed the keys to the local children's shelter. Turns out, they got all the space they wanted. I'm Dennis, 64 years old, and I spent 33 years running industrial cleaning operations for chemical plants and refineries across North Dakota. Started as a night shift cleaner at an oil refinery in Williston, working my way up until I owned the largest specialized cleaning company in the tri-state area. When you're dealing with hazardous materials and million-dollar equipment shutdowns, there's no room for mistakes. Every contract meant someone's safety, and a company's bottom line depended on my crew doing the job right. I thought that kind of responsibility and work ethic meant something to my family. Boy, was I wrong. That Christmas morning started like any other December day here in Fargo. I was sitting in my home office on Elm Street reviewing the final paperwork for selling my business, a deal that had netted me just over $2 million after taxes. My daughter had moved back in with her husband Xander and their twin daughters after their organic juice bar went belly up in Minneapolis. Since October, I'd been covering everything: the $3,800 mortgage, utilities, groceries, car insurance, even the lease payments on that ridiculous BMW X5 they claimed they needed for brand image. You'd think a man who built a company from nothing, who employed 47 people at peak season, who had Fortune 500 companies on speed dial because they trusted my work, would get some recognition from his own flesh and blood. You'd think they'd show a little gratitude for the $72,000 I'd already spent keeping them afloat since they moved back home. But there I was, planning our traditional Christmas feast. Prime rib from the specialty butcher downtown, all the trimmings, presents already wrapped and stacked under the 12-foot Fraser fir I'd had delivered and decorated myself, completely blind to what was really going on in my own house. The phone rang at 8:50 a.m. Brinley's voice had that rehearsed quality, like she'd been practicing her lines. "Dad, can you come upstairs? We need to have a family meeting." I found them in my living room, the one with the gas fireplace I'd had installed last winter for $8,000 because Brinley said the old electric heat made the room feel uninviting. They sat on my leather sectional, the one I'd bought after consulting with Brinley about the color, and delivered their news like they were doing me a favor. "We've been talking," Brinley said, smoothing her hair nervously. "And we think everyone would be happier if you spent Christmas with Aunt Patricia in Grand Forks this year. We need some space to create our own family memories." Xander nodded earnestly. "Nothing personal, Dennis. We just want the girls to experience Christmas in a more intimate setting, without feeling like they're visiting someone else's house." I looked around at my living room, at the custom built-in entertainment center that had cost me $15,000, at the Christmas stockings hanging from the mantel, including the one with my name on it that I'd hung there myself 3 days earlier. "Space," I said, letting the word roll around in my mouth like I was tasting something bitter. "In the house I own outright. The house I've been maintaining and improving for 15 years. Brinley's face flushed slightly. "Dad, we really appreciate everything you've done, but we're adults now. We need to establish our own Christmas traditions. Adults. The same adults who'd called me in panic when their business failed, who couldn't make it 2 months without my financial support." Here's what they didn't know. 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a very interesting phone call from my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. She'd overheard Xander talking to someone in the driveway about how they were planning to convince the old man to move to a condo so they could finally have some space to breathe. She'd thought I should know. So when they asked for space that Christmas morning, I was more than ready to give them exactly what they wanted. For 12 years, I'd been the guy who made Christmas happen in that house. Every December 1st, like clockwork, I'd haul the decorations down from the attic. Boxes and boxes of lights, ornaments, garland, the whole 9 yards. I'd spend an entire weekend transforming that place into something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. The 12-foot tree in the front window, lights strung along every roofline, wreaths on every door. Hell, I even had one of those inflatable Santa displays in the front yard that the neighborhood kids loved. After Martha died 3 years ago, Christmas became my thing. I'd plan the menu weeks in advance, special order the prime rib from Henderson's butcher shop downtown, coordinate with the bakery for fresh rolls and pies. Thanksgiving was nice, but Christmas? Christmas was when I pulled out all the stops. 5-course meals, expensive wine, Presents that actually meant something because I'd spent time thinking about what each person wanted. When Brinley and Xander moved back in after their juice bar disaster, I figured it would make Christmas even better. More people around the table, grandkids to spoil, that whole multi-generational holiday magic Martha always talked about. I turned the guest bedroom into a playroom for the twins, bought them a swing set for the backyard, even converted part of my workshop into a kid-friendly space with art supplies and toys. The bills started adding up fast, but hell, that's what family's for, right? $3,800 for the mortgage, another $600 for utilities that doubled with 4 extra people in the house. Groceries went from maybe $400 a month to over $1,000. Apparently organic everything costs a fortune, and Xander had very specific dietary requirements. Then there was the BMW lease at $850 a month, full coverage insurance, health insurance for the whole family through my business plan. I didn't mind. 47 years of marriage taught me that happiness isn't about money in the bank. It's about the people around your table. And after losing Martha, having the house full of life again felt like a blessing. When 5-year-old Emma would climb on my lap and ask me to read her a story, or when little Sophia would help me in the workshop, handing me tools and asking a million questions about how engines worked, it made every expense worth it. But looking back now, I should have paid more attention to the conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms. The way Brinley and Xander would huddle together at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices that got quiet when they heard my footsteps. How they'd started rearranging furniture without asking, moving pictures around, talking about improvements they wanted to make. Last month, I found real estate listings printed out and left on the kitchen counter. When I asked Brinley about them, she said they were just dreaming about their own place someday. But these weren't starter homes or modest family houses. These were $500,000 properties with pools and 3-car garages, properties that would require the kind of income they definitely didn't have. I started noticing other things too. How they'd invite friends over without asking, treating my living room like their personal entertainment space. How Xander had started parking his motorcycle in my garage without permission, pushing my tools and equipment to one side. How they'd scheduled a home security consultation without mentioning it to me, and I only found out when the technician showed up at my door. The breaking point should have been when I overheard Xander on the phone with someone talking about how they were working on transitioning the old guy to a smaller place so they could finally have the space they deserved. But even then, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I figured maybe they were just frustrated, maybe they felt cramped, maybe I wasn't understanding their perspective. So when Christmas morning came around and they asked for space, I wasn't completely surprised. Disappointed? Hell yes. But surprised? Not really. I'd been watching this train wreck build up steam for months. The real wake-up call came 2 days after Thanksgiving. I'd spent the entire holiday cooking for 8 people, Brinley's family plus some friends they'd invited without asking me first. I didn't mind the extra mouths to feed, but what got under my skin was how they introduced me to their guests. Not as the homeowner, not as the guy who'd spent 2 days preparing the feast they were enjoying. I was Brinley's dad, who's staying with us for a while, staying with them. In my own damn house. But the moment that really opened my eyes happened the following Monday. I was in my workshop, rebuilding a hydraulic pump for one of my old industrial clients, just a favor job to keep my hands busy, when I heard voices through the thin wall that separated my space from the main house. Brinley was on the phone, and she wasn't trying to keep her voice down. Mom's been gone 3 years now, and Dad's just rattling around in this big house, she was saying. It's not healthy for him, and honestly, it's not fair to us either. We're trying to build our lives, and we can't do that living under someone else's roof. There was a pause then. I know it's his house, but he's 64 years old. How much space does one person really need? I set down my tools and listened harder. The person on the other end was talking, and I could hear Brinley making agreeing noises. Then she continued. Xander found this perfect senior community in West Fargo. It's got all the amenities, social activities, transportation services. Dad would probably be happier there with people his own age, and we could finally have some stability for the girls. My blood pressure spiked so hard I had to sit down on my workbench. A senior community. They were planning to ship me off to an old folks' home so they could take over my house. The house I'd worked my ass off to buy. The house I'd maintained and improved for 15 years. The house that held every memory of my life with Martha. But it got worse. Xander's voice joined the conversation. Apparently, he'd picked up another phone. The best part is Dennis would probably appreciate not having to deal with maintenance and upkeep anymore. This place is getting to be too much for him anyway. Did you see how long it took him to get the Christmas lights up this year? It took me longer because I was doing it myself, while also paying for everything else they needed. It took me longer because I was 64 years old with arthritis in my hands, trying to string lights on a 2-story house without asking for help because every time I did, Xander had some excuse about his bad back. Plus, Brinley added, the equity in this house could help fund his retirement community fees. It's really a win-win situation. He gets proper care and socialization. We get the space we need to raise our family properly, and everyone's happier. The equity in my house. They were planning to sell my home to pay for my exile. I sat in that workshop for 2 hours, just processing what I'd heard. These weren't desperate kids who'd hit a rough patch and needed temporary help. These were calculating adults who'd moved in with a plan. They'd been working on this angle for months, maybe since the day they moved back in. Every conversation about my age, every comment about the house being too big for one person, every suggestion that I might be happier somewhere with more social interaction. It was all part of a strategy. That night at dinner, I watched them differently. Really watched them. The way they talked about future plans without including me. How they discussed renovations they wanted to make. Not suggestions or requests, but definite plans. How they'd already moved some of their furniture into the master bedroom, claiming they needed more space for the twins' clothes. When Brinley mentioned that her friend Sarah's dad had loved his move to assisted living, I just nodded and said it sounded nice. When Xander brought up how much work it must be for me to maintain such a big property, I agreed that it was getting challenging. Let them think their manipulation was working. But inside, I was already making plans of my own. 33 years in industrial cleaning had taught me that the biggest messes require the most thorough solutions, and this mess was about to get very thoroughly cleaned up. The next morning, I called my attorney, Patricia Henderson, before 7 a.m. When you've spent 3 decades dealing with industrial contracts worth millions of dollars, you learn the value of having good legal counsel on speed dial. Patricia had handled the sale of my cleaning business, my estate planning after Martha died, and every major financial decision I'd made in the last decade. Patricia, I need to discuss some family issues, I said, sitting in my workshop with the door closed. Hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to make sure their adult children couldn't manipulate them into giving up their home, what options would they have? There was a pause. Patricia had known me long enough to recognize when I wasn't asking hypothetical questions. Dennis, what's going on? I laid it all out. The overheard phone conversations, their plans for my transition to senior living, the way they were treating my house like their personal property. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. How much financial support are you currently providing? She asked. I pulled out my bank statements. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, car payments, insurance. I'm looking at about $6,000 a month minimum, plus whatever emergencies come up. And they have no legal claim to the property. None. House is in my name only. Mortgage is nearly paid off. Martha and I never added anyone else to the deed. Patricia's voice got that sharp edge it took on when she was building a case. Dennis, you have options. More options than they realize. But first, I need you to document everything, every conversation, every expense, every time they make decisions about your property without consulting you. Can you do that? For the next 2 weeks, I became a man on a mission. I started carrying a small notebook, writing down every interaction, every expense, every assumption they made about their house. When Brinley scheduled a carpet cleaning service without asking me, I wrote it down. When Xander moved his weight bench into my garage permanently, I documented it. When they had friends over and introduced the place as our home, I made notes. I also started making phone calls, called the local children's shelter where Martha used to volunteer just to catch up and see how they were doing. Learned they desperately needed a permanent facility. They'd been operating out of a cramped rental for 3 years, turning away kids because they didn't have space. Called my accountant to understand the tax implications of charitable giving. Called a local real estate agent to get a current market assessment, just to know what we were dealing with. The most important call was to my old business partner, Jake Morrison. Jake had retired the same time I did, and we'd stayed close. Jake, I said, remember that Christmas party you're planning for your grandkids, the one where you were worried about having enough space? Yeah, what about it? How would you feel about hosting it at my place? I'm thinking about doing something special for Christmas this year, something that would really make the local news. Jake knew me well enough to hear the undertone. Dennis, what are you planning? Let's just say I'm working on a Christmas surprise that's going to give some people exactly what they asked for. Meanwhile, Brinley and Xander kept dropping hints about my future living arrangements. Casual comments about how nice it would be for me to have people my own age to socialize with. Suggestions that the house was getting to be too much work for someone my age. They even left brochures for senior communities on the kitchen counter, claiming they were just thinking ahead. The breaking point came December 15th. I walked into my living room to find them measuring the walls, discussing where they'd put a new entertainment center. When I asked what they were doing, Brinley had the audacity to say they were planning some improvements for after the holidays. That night, I finalized my plans with Patricia. The paperwork was ready, the arrangements were made, and the timing was perfect. Christmas morning was exactly 10 days away. December 20th, 5 days before Christmas, I put my plan into motion. First stop was Patricia's office to sign the donation paperwork. The Fargo Children's Emergency Shelter would become the new owners of my house on Elm Street, effective Christmas Day. The legal documents were airtight, an irrevocable charitable gift that would provide them with a permanent facility worth approximately $450,000. You're sure about this, Dennis? Patricia asked as I signed the final papers. This is your home we're talking about. I set down the pen and looked her straight in the eye. Patricia, home is where people want you. What I've got right now is just an address where people tolerate me while they plot to get rid of me. Next stop was the bank. I transferred the remaining mortgage balance, about $68,000, into a separate account dedicated to the donation. The house would be transferred debt-free, giving those kids the clean start they deserved. I also opened a new checking account and moved most of my liquid assets into it. If Brinley and Xander wanted to be independent adults, they were about to get their wish. Then came the fun part. I drove to Henderson Media Relations, a local PR firm that handled charitable events and community announcements. I want to make a major donation to the children's shelter, I told Rebecca Henderson, the owner, and I want it to be a Christmas surprise that the whole community will remember. Rebecca's eyes lit up when I explained what I had in mind. A Christmas morning house donation? Dennis, this is incredible. Channel 4 will absolutely want to cover this. It's exactly the kind of heartwarming story people love during the holidays. We scheduled everything for 8 a.m. Christmas morning. The news crew would arrive at 7:30 to set up. The shelter director and some of the kids would arrive at 7:45. The official key presentation would happen at 8 sharp, right there on my front porch, with that giant red velvet bow I'd ordered special from the party supply store. What about your family? Rebecca asked. Will they be part of the presentation? I smiled. Oh, they'll definitely be surprised. That evening, I started phase 2 of my plan. I called my cousin Reed in Portland, the one Brinley had suggested I visit for Christmas. Reed, remember how you're always saying I should come visit? How would you feel about a permanent house guest for a few weeks while I figure out my next move? Reed didn't ask too many questions. We'd been close since we were kids, and he knew something was up. Dennis, you know you're welcome here as long as you need. What's going on with Brinley and her family? Let's just say they're about to get exactly what they asked for. I spent the next 3 days quietly packing my personal belongings. Photo albums, Martha's jewelry, my important documents, clothes, and a few pieces of furniture that had sentimental value. Stuff I could fit in a rental truck. Everything else was staying with the house as part of the donation. The new flat-screen TV, the leather sectional, the custom kitchen appliances, all of it. Friday morning, December 23rd, I rented a storage unit across town and moved my essential belongings there. Brinley and Xander were out Christmas shopping with my credit card, something I'd be canceling after the holidays, so they didn't see the moving truck in the driveway. That night at dinner, they were practically glowing with excitement about Christmas morning. The girls are so excited, Brinley said. This is going to be their best Christmas ever. Xander nodded enthusiastically. There's something special about Christmas in your own home, you know? Your own home, if they only knew. Christmas Eve, I made my final preparations. Confirmed everything with the news station, the shelter, and Patricia. Packed an overnight bag for my drive to Portland. Left a detailed letter explaining everything on my bedroom dresser, along with copies of all the legal documents. As I went to bed that night, listening to Xander and Brinley talking excitedly in the next room about their Christmas morning plans, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Tomorrow, they'd get all the space they'd been asking for. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold, typical North Dakota December weather. I was up at 5 a.m., showering and putting on my best suit. The navy blue one Martha always said made me look distinguished. If I was going to be on television, I wanted to look the part of a generous community benefactor, not some old man getting kicked out of his house. At 6:30, I started hearing movement from Brinley and Xander's room. The twins were up, probably excited about presents. I could hear their little voices chattering about Santa and Christmas morning. For a moment, I felt a pang of regret, not about what I was doing, but about how it had come to this. I made coffee in my kitchen one last time, standing at the window, watching the street. At 7:15, I saw the Channel 4 news van pull up, followed by Rebecca Henderson's car, right on schedule. I grabbed my overnight bag and headed for the front door. Brinley appeared at the top of the stairs in her robe, hair messy from sleep. "Dad, where are you going so early? And why are there news trucks outside?" "Come on downstairs, sweetheart," I said calmly. "There's something I want to show you." Xander emerged from the bedroom, pulling on a t-shirt. "Dennis, what's going on? Why are there cameras outside our house?" Our house. Even now, even caught completely off guard, he still called it our house. "Get the girls dressed," I told them. "You're all going to want to see this." By 7:40, the whole family was gathered in the living room, looking confused and increasingly worried. Through the front window, we could see the news crew setting up their equipment on my front lawn. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, drawn by the unusual Christmas morning activity. At 7:45, 3 cars pulled up. Sarah Mitchell, the director of the Fargo Children's Emergency Shelter, got out of the first one, along with her assistant. The other 2 cars held 6 children, ages ranging from about 5 to 12, all dressed in their best clothes and looking excited but nervous. Brinley's face had gone pale. "Dad, what is this? What's happening?" I straightened my tie and picked up the folder Patricia had prepared with all the legal documents. "This is Christmas morning, sweetheart, and you said you wanted space." At exactly 8 a.m., I opened the front door and walked out onto the porch. The news cameras were rolling. Sarah Mitchell was standing ready with the children behind her, and Rebecca Henderson had a microphone in her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca announced to the cameras, "we're here this Christmas morning to witness an extraordinary act of generosity. Dennis Campbell, a retired business owner from Fargo, is donating his entire home to the Fargo Children's Emergency Shelter." I could hear gasping behind me from inside the house, but I kept my eyes forward, smiling for the cameras. "Dennis," the Channel 4 reporter said, stepping forward with her microphone, "what inspired you to make such an incredible Christmas gift?" I cleared my throat and looked directly into the camera. "Well, family is the most important thing in life, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people you love is exactly what they ask for. My family told me they needed space, and these children need a home. It seemed like the perfect Christmas solution." Sarah Mitchell stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Campbell, on behalf of all the children we serve, I cannot thank you enough. This beautiful home will provide stability and safety for dozens of children for years to come." I pulled out the house keys, the same keys I had made when I first bought this place 15 years ago. As I handed them to Sarah, the children cheered, and the cameras captured every moment. Behind me, I could hear Xander's voice, shaky and disbelieving. "Dennis, you can't be serious. This is our home. Where are we supposed to go?" I turned around slowly, still smiling, and looked at my daughter and son-in-law standing in the doorway of what was no longer their house. "You said you needed space," I replied calmly. "Now you have all the space in the world." The silence that followed was deafening. Brinley stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Xander's face had gone from confusion to panic to something approaching rage. The twins, Emma and Sophia, pressed against their mother's legs, sensing something was terribly wrong, but not understanding what. "Dad," Brinley finally managed to whisper, "you can't be serious. This is some kind of joke, right? For the cameras?" I turned back to Sarah Mitchell and handed her the deed transfer documents. "These should finalize everything, Sarah. Patricia Henderson, my attorney, will handle any remaining paperwork. The house is yours. Debt-free, effective immediately. The reporter stepped closer, sensing drama. Mr. Campbell, it looks like your family is surprised by your generous decision. Was this a Christmas surprise for them too? I nodded thoughtfully. You know, sometimes the people we love don't realize how much they mean to us until we give them exactly what they ask for. My daughter and her husband have been telling me for weeks that they needed space, that they wanted independence, that they felt like they were living in someone else's house. Well, now they're free to create their own family traditions wherever they choose. Behind me, I heard Xander explode. Dennis, what the hell do you think you're doing? We live here. Our kids live here. You can't just give away our home. I turned around slowly, maintaining my calm demeanor for the cameras. Xander, this was never your home. This was my home, which I graciously shared with you when you needed help. And now that you've made it clear you'd prefer your independence, I've simply made that possible. Brinley was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Dad, we never said we wanted you to leave. We needed space, I finished for her. Yes, I heard you. I also heard your phone conversation 2 weeks ago about moving me to that senior community in West Fargo so you could have this house to yourselves. I heard Xander talking about transitioning the old guy so you could finally have the space you deserved. The color drained from both their faces. They hadn't realized I knew about their plans. The news reporter was eating this up, but professionally. So this donation was inspired by family conversations about living arrangements? Exactly, I said. When you love someone, you listen to what they really want, even when they don't say it directly. My family wanted independence and space. These children needed a home. It seemed like divine intervention, really. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward diplomatically. Mr. Campbell, we certainly don't want to displace anyone. If your family needs time to make arrangements. I held up my hand. That's very kind, Sarah, but they're adults who've been planning for this transition for months. I'm sure they have everything figured out. I looked directly at Brinley and Xander. Don't you? Xander's voice cracked. Dennis, we don't have anywhere to go. We don't have money for deposits or first month's rent or, Jesus, we can't afford to move out on our own. You know that. I pulled out my wallet and counted out 5 $20 bills. Here's your Christmas present. $100 should cover a motel room for a few nights while you figure out your independence. I paused, looking at him seriously. Unless you'd prefer to stay in that senior community you picked out for me. I hear they have very reasonable short-term rates. The neighbors who had gathered were whispering among themselves. Mrs. Johnson, who had originally warned me about their plans, was nodding approvingly. The other longtime residents knew exactly what had been going on. They'd watched Brinley and Xander treat my house like their personal kingdom for months. Mr. Campbell, the reporter asked, do you have plans for where you'll be spending Christmas? I smiled genuinely for the first time that morning. I'm driving to Portland to spend the holidays with family who actually wants me there, people who appreciate company rather than tolerate it. I walked back toward the house where Brinley and Xander were still standing in shock. You have until noon to collect your personal belongings. The children will need time to get settled in their new home. I looked at my watch. That gives you almost 4 hours, more than enough time for people who've been planning this transition for months. What happened next will stay with me forever. Brinley dropped to her knees right there on the front porch, in front of the cameras, in front of the neighbors, in front of the children who were about to move into her former home. Not a graceful descent, but a full collapse, like her legs had just given out. Daddy, please, she sobbed. And suddenly, she wasn't a 32-year-old mother trying to manipulate me out of my house. She was a little girl who'd just realized her safety net was gone forever. We're sorry. We didn't mean it. We never wanted you to leave. We were frustrated and we said stupid things, but we love you. Please don't do this. The news cameras captured every second, and I could see the reporter making subtle hand signals to her cameraman to keep rolling. This was exactly the kind of human drama that made for compelling television. Xander had gone completely white. He stood there looking at the deed transfer documents in Sarah Mitchell's hands like they were a death sentence. Dennis, you don't understand. We can't afford to live anywhere else. My credit is shot from the business failure. We don't have savings for deposits or moving expenses. We literally have nowhere to go. I looked down at my daughter, still on her knees on my porch, and felt something I hadn't expected. Absolutely nothing. No guilt, no second thoughts, no paternal instinct to rescue her. just the cold satisfaction of watching someone face the consequences of their choices. "Brinley," I said quietly so the microphones wouldn't pick up every word, "stand up. You're embarrassing yourself in front of the whole neighborhood." She struggled to her feet, mascara streaked down her face, looking around frantically at the crowd that had gathered. "Dad, what about the girls? They're only 5 years old. You're making your own granddaughters homeless on Christmas morning." That was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when she'd try to weaponize my love for Emma and Sophia against me. I'd seen it coming from a mile away. I walked over to where the twins were huddled against the front door, looking scared and confused. I knelt down to their eye level and spoke gently. "Emma, Sophia, do you remember the stories I used to tell you about the children who didn't have homes? The ones Grandma Martha used to help at the shelter?" Emma nodded, her thumb in her mouth. Sophia whispered, "The sad kids who needed families." "That's right. Well, these children behind me are those kids, and now they're going to live in this big, beautiful house where they'll be safe and warm and loved. Isn't that wonderful?" Both girls nodded, their natural empathy overriding their confusion about the adult drama unfolding around them. I stood up and looked at Brinley and Xander. "Your daughters are going to be fine. Children are resilient, and they'll adapt to whatever housing situation their parents provide for them. The question is, what kind of situation are you going to provide?" Sarah Mitchell stepped forward diplomatically. "Excuse me, Mr. Campbell, if the family needs a few more days to make arrangements, we could potentially delay the transition." "No," I said firmly. "The paperwork is signed, the donation is final, and these children have been waiting long enough for stability. My family has had months to plan their independence. Today is moving day." The Channel 4 reporter stepped closer. "Mr. Campbell, some viewers might wonder if this seems harsh, making your family leave on Christmas morning." I looked directly into the camera, and I could feel 33 years of hard work, sacrifice, and quiet dignity flowing through my voice. "Ma'am, I spent 3 decades building a business that employed dozens of people and served major corporations across 3 states. I bought this house 15 years ago with money I earned with my own hands. When my daughter's family needed help, I opened my doors and my wallet without hesitation." I paused, letting that sink in. "But when people start making plans to force me out of my own home so they can take it over, when they start treating my generosity like their entitlement, when they forget that kindness is a gift, not a right, well, that's when the gifts stop coming." I pulled my car keys from my pocket. "I'm driving to Portland now to spend Christmas with people who appreciate my company instead of calculating how to get rid of me. Brinley, Xander, you have until noon to collect your belongings. After that, this becomes trespassing on shelter property." The children from the shelter were already exploring their new front yard, pointing at the Christmas decorations I'd hung just weeks ago. Their excitement was infectious, and several neighbors were approaching to introduce themselves and offer welcome gifts. As I walked toward my truck, Brinley called out one last desperate time. "Dad, what if we promise to change? What if we apologize and treat you better?" I stopped and turned around. "Brinley, you're 32 years old. If you haven't figured out how to treat people with respect by now, I'm not the right teacher. But I'll tell you what, when you find your own place and start supporting your own family without scheming to steal someone else's home, give me a call. Maybe we can talk about having a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency." I got in my truck and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see Brinley and Xander standing on the porch of what used to be their home, surrounded by excited children who were about to have the best Christmas of their lives. It was the most satisfying moment of my entire 64 years. The drive to Portland took 8 hours, and I spent every mile of it feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone rang constantly for the first 3 hours. Brinley, Xander, even some relatives I hadn't heard from in years who'd apparently seen the news coverage. I let them all go to voicemail. I had nothing left to say to any of them. When I finally pulled into Reed's driveway that evening, he was waiting on his porch with a beer and a knowing smile. "Saw you on the news, cousin. Channel 8 picked up the story from the Fargo station. You've gone viral." "Viral?" "Dennis, half the internet is calling you a Christmas hero. The other half thinks you're the worst father in America. Either way, you're famous." Reed handed me the beer and clapped me on the back. "Personally, I think those kids got exactly what they deserved. Over the next few days, the story exploded across social media. The video of me handing over the keys while my family stood crying in the background had been shared thousands of times. The comments were split between people calling me a saint for helping homeless children and people calling me heartless for making my family homeless. What really got people's attention was the follow-up reporting. Channel 4 did some digging and discovered that Brinley and Xander had been living rent-free in my house for over a year, with me covering all expenses while they made no effort to find work or become financially independent. They found the real estate listings Brinley had been collecting, the senior community brochures they'd left around the house, even interviewed Mrs. Johnson about the conversation she'd overheard. The public opinion shifted pretty quickly after that. Patricia called me on December 28th with updates. "Dennis, your daughter and son-in-law found a studio apartment across town. Month-to-month lease, not great neighborhood, but it's housing. They're managing. And the twins? They're enrolled in a new elementary school starting after New Year's. Brinley got a job at a call center, and Xander is doing delivery driving. It's not glamorous, but they're standing on their own feet for the first time in over a year." I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, no urge to swoop in and rescue them. They were adults dealing with adult consequences, exactly like they should have been all along. The children's shelter, on the other hand, was thriving. Sarah Mitchell sent me photos of the kids in their new home, decorating their bedrooms, cooking in the kitchen I'd renovated, playing in the backyard where I'd built the swing set for my granddaughters. The local community had rallied around them, donating furniture, clothes, toys, even setting up college funds for some of the older kids. "Mr. Campbell," Sarah wrote in her thank you letter, "you didn't just give these children a house, you gave them hope, stability, and proof that the world contains people who care about their welfare. 3 of them are already showing improved grades in school, and 2 others are sleeping through the night for the first time in months." New Year's Eve, Reed and I were sitting on his back deck, watching fireworks over the Portland skyline, when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Dennis Campbell from the Christmas house donation story? My name is Margaret Wilson. My late husband left me a large house in Seattle that's too big for me alone. But I've been afraid to downsize because my adult children keep pressuring me to let them move in and help with maintenance. Your story gave me the courage to make my own donation to a local women's shelter. Thank you for showing me it's okay to choose who deserves your generosity." That was the first of dozens of messages I'd receive over the following weeks. Older people who'd been manipulated by family members, parents whose adult children had moved back home and turned into entitled freeloaders, widows and widowers being pressured to give up their independence. My story had apparently struck a nerve across the entire country. The most interesting call came from a producer at a morning talk show who wanted me to appear as an expert on family financial boundaries. Apparently, there was a whole movement of older Americans who were learning to say no to manipulative adult children. I declined the TV appearances. I wasn't interested in becoming some kind of guru or celebrity. I'd simply done what needed to be done to protect my dignity and assets from people who'd confused my kindness with weakness. But I did start returning some phone calls from people who genuinely needed advice on similar situations, people whose adult children had moved home and taken over. Parents whose generosity was being exploited, older adults being pressured to make financial decisions that benefited everyone except themselves. The advice I gave was always the same. Love doesn't mean letting people take advantage of you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new condo overlooking the Columbia River, watching the sunrise paint the Portland skyline gold and orange. It's a beautiful 2-bedroom place with a small workshop space where I can tinker with engines when the mood strikes. Reed helped me find it, and for the first time in years, I wake up every morning in a home where I'm genuinely wanted. The calls from Brinley stopped after about 2 months. The last voicemail she left was different from the angry, demanding messages I'd received right after Christmas. Her voice was tired, but there was something else in it, maybe the beginning of understanding. "Dad, I know you probably won't call me back and I don't blame you, but I wanted you to know that we're doing okay. Not great, but okay. Xander and I both have jobs now, and we're managing the apartment. The girls are adjusting to their new school. It's been hard, really hard, but..." She paused for a long time. "I think I'm starting to understand what you were trying to teach us, about independence, about respect, about not taking people for granted. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to figure it out. I hope someday you might want to talk again. I saved that message, but I haven't called her back yet. Maybe I will eventually, when enough time has passed, when I'm sure any relationship we rebuild will be based on mutual respect instead of financial dependence. Or maybe I won't. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay that way. The children's shelter has sent me regular updates. The house on Elm Street has been completely transformed into a proper facility, with bedrooms that can accommodate up to 12 kids, a study room, a play area, and even a small workshop where older kids can learn basic repair skills. They named it the Dennis Campbell House, which both honors me and slightly embarrasses me every time I see it mentioned in their newsletters. More importantly, it's working. The stable environment has allowed caseworkers to place children in permanent homes more successfully. Kids who'd been in the system for years are getting adopted because they're emotionally stable enough to bond with new families. The local school district reports that children from the facility are performing better academically than kids from other temporary housing situations. I've started volunteering with other charitable organizations here in Portland. Nothing as dramatic as donating houses, but regular contributions of time and money to causes that matter. Reed jokes that I'm becoming Portland's favorite philanthropist, but the truth is, I just like the feeling of my resources going to people who appreciate them. The business inquiries keep coming too. Apparently, there's a market for someone who specializes in family financial protection strategies. Attorneys refer clients to me. Financial planners want my input on estate planning for older adults with manipulative relatives, and I've even been asked to consult on a few cases where families are trying to force elderly parents out of their homes. I don't charge for the advice. I just tell people the same thing I learned. Your kindness is valuable, and you get to decide who deserves it. Last week, I got a letter that made everything worthwhile. It was from Emma, my granddaughter, written in the careful cursive of a 6-year-old who's working hard to make each letter perfect. Dear Grandpa Dennis, Mommy helped me find your address. I wanted to tell you that I understand now about the house. The kids who live there now are really happy, and one of them is in my class at school. Her name is Rebecca, and she says it's the best house she's ever lived in. Mommy says maybe we can visit you in Portland someday if you want us to. I miss our workshop time, but I know you are happy now. Love, Emma. I cried when I read that letter. Not from sadness or regret, but from relief. My granddaughter understood that sometimes doing the right thing looks harsh from the outside, but creates something beautiful for people who really need it. That Christmas morning when I handed over those keys, I thought I was just protecting myself from family members who'd forgotten the difference between generosity and entitlement. But I accomplished something much more important. I taught my granddaughters that love isn't about letting people take advantage of you, and I gave 12 homeless children the stability they needed to build better lives. Sometimes the most loving gift you can give someone is exactly what they ask for, especially when what they're really asking for is the chance to grow up and take responsibility for their own lives. As for me, I'm 65 years old, financially secure, living in a city I love, surrounded by people who appreciate my company rather than calculate my net worth. Every morning I wake up in a home where I'm genuinely welcome. Turns out that's all the space I ever really needed. If you enjoyed this story of family justice and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who took your generosity for granted? Let us know your story.